Hi, my name is Ariel Gutkin. I'm a second-year law student at Penn State Law, and I'm participating in the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For one of the lab's projects, Witnesses to Her Story, we're capturing women's personal experiences in education, sports, and the workforce, focusing on the 1960s and 1970s. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing my great aunt, Irene Berkowitz, a first-generation college graduate, an educator and administrator for over 35 years, and a wife, mother, and grandmother. So, Aunt Irene, I know you were born in 1948 in Brooklyn, New York. I want to start by asking you a little bit about your childhood. So, growing up, who lived in your home with you?
My mother, my father, and my older sister, your Grammy, and myself.
So, did both of your parents work outside of the home?
Yes.
Okay. And what did your dad do?
My father was what they called at the time a film technician. His office basically developed the film in banks that ran the cameras to prevent robberies and
Oh, very
such.
cool.
They also did film strips, which is an old word for you, but we use them in schools to show children certain academic situations. So that was what he did. My mom was a bookkeeper and basically spent most of her working life working in an office in a synagogue.
Hmm. So, since both of your parents worked outside of the home, how did they split up certain responsibilities? For example, if you were sick, who would take you to the doctor?
Well, my mom would generally take off. It wasn't usually my father because
Mhm.
my mom's job was closer to home. He worked in the city. We lived in Brooklyn. And we also had the family lived very close to each other. My aunts and my uncles lived within walking distance. So if there was a problem and my two aunts who lived nearby did not work, sometimes my mom would ask them if they could stay with me until she got home or until my sister got home, because my sister is 8 years older than I am. So if I was 7 or 8 years old, she was 15 or 16. She came home from high school 2 o'clock, 2:30. So she would then be home with me. But that's basically how it worked.
And I know your sister was 8 years older, but growing up, did you notice that your parents had different expectations for you both? So, whether that be with chores or grades or even activities you were involved in?
Well, what I remember, most of my chores were relegated to cleaning up the kitchen after dinner. Very good cleaner up of a kitchen. Because my mom worked. Okay, it was harder on her, though there was some days she did work like half a day. So I guess she could then take care of the home as far as cleaning, as far as the buying of groceries and things of that nature. My responsibilities at home, like I said, was basically helping her after dinner. The schoolwork for me was very important. I was the one who took it very seriously because I knew at an early age that I wanted more than, stopping after high school. So it became my issue. My father was extremely supportive
Mhm.
of the schoolwork and told me to achieve as much as I could. My mom had a different viewpoint. For her, a woman's job was to go to school, graduate, get a job, and then get married and have children and stay home.
And
But
how did that make you feel if you knew you wanted more and she did not want that for you?
well, I had a mind of my own
Mhm.
at a very early age. She and I did clash on certain things. But, in the end, she knew that this is the way it was going to be. She did accept it, but I was lucky to have the support of my dad, who was very happy to hear. He was one of five children, all born in the US, but of immigrant parents.
Mhm.
And none of those five had graduated college. But I had an older cousin who had started nursing school.
Mm.
And when I had told him early on that I wanted to go to college, he was thrilled. So for them, it was a matter of finances. My parents were not people of means. And he knew that that would be a difficult situation. But I was well aware. I had very good guidance counselors, both in middle school and in high school, who told me about keeping up my grades so then I could enter the SUNY or CUNY system at the time and would only have to pay for books.
Oh, that
Didn't
makes
have to
sense.
pay for tuition or, room and board if I went to a CUNY college in the city. So that was my goal. That was
Yeah,
my
so
goal.
we definitely will talk a lot more about college, but I wanted to ask you about your academics first in elementary, middle school, and high school. So, did you ever have a uniform or a dress code required?
I went to public school. So, and I don't recall a dress code the way we think about that now. But my mother made sure that I wore my dress every day or my skirt. And in the winter, it was funny. We used to wear a pair of, like, now you'd say it's leggings under a skirt, but we wore pants in the winter because we did not, I lived in Brooklyn. You didn't have a bus that came to the corner. You
You
walked.
walked to school.
You walked.
You only wore similar to leggings or pants in the winter.
In the winter. Otherwise, we wore regular, skirts, shoes, socks, and a
And was
blouse.
that the same for your sister and your mom?
You're asking about when my mom went to public school?
Or what she wore when you were growing up?
Oh, she always wore a dress. My
Mhm.
mother always wore a dress or a skirt and blouse because she worked in an office. That's what I recall. I don't even remember her wearing slacks or pants in the wintertime because she felt she had to be appropriately dressed. My sister, too, for the most part, from what I remember, she wore a skirt, a blouse, dress, whatever was required.
And was that what you were seeing with all your friends in the community also?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And the other thing to consider is we were brought up in a close to Orthodox Jewish home, somewhere between conservative and Orthodox. Our grandparents were Orthodox, so that on Friday nights and Saturdays, as a child, I spent a lot of time in the synagogue.
Mhm.
So you never wore slacks or pants at that time into the synagogue. That was not done. Plus, if we went to my grandpa's synagogue, we sat separate from the men.
Mhm.
So, that was another thing. So it played a big part and had a major influence on, I would say, the dress code, as you say, at that time.
Definitely. And moving into classes at school, do you remember what classes were offered or maybe certain classes that weren't offered to you?
You're talking about in high school?
Yeah, just growing up. It even could
Yeah,
be
because
middle school.
elementary is pretty much standard. I don't care where you are, whether you're in Portland, Oregon, or Brooklyn, New York. Elementary school is pretty much the same. The only thing that's probably changed now is, yes, more children come from what I see as when I worked, they come in pants and, slacks, the girls. So it didn't matter. Middle school, I'm trying to think. Middle school courses, what was offered to us that I think was unique at that time in sixth grade was that opportunity to what they called being a reading mentor to a kindergartner or a first grade child. So that was something I got involved in right away because I was always an avid reader. And so I enjoyed the fact that time could be given to me to go sit with a kindergartner or first grader. At that time, you did the alphabet, the sounds and the letters, and I really enjoyed that, which is basically when I made up my mind that I wanted to be a teacher.
And
So
who was involved in that? Was that boys, girls?
it was open to anybody.
But was it about both boys and girls joined it?
Yes, I wouldn't say we had an equal amount
Mhm.
of, that, in that situation. We had obviously more girls in the sixth grade that did it, but there was some boys, and it was interesting because I remember one particular boy, he was 12 years old. He wanted to know if he could mentor in the gymnasium. but that wasn't the program. It was to help the kindergartens and first grades with reading skills. But he eventually became a phys ed teacher.
He did.
Yes,
So
yes.
he knew he
I
wanted to
met
be a
him years
teacher.
later. He wanted to be in the gymnasium, but they didn't have that program for him. But he did bring it up. I don't know if they do it now, but he did bring that up.
And were, I assume your teachers led that? So were the teachers men or women who were leading that program?
Oh, at that time, I would have to say, except for the phys ed teachers, which was usually one of each, one male, one female, it was all female teachers in the elementary school level. But most of the supervisors, administrators, when I was a child, were men
Right.
at that time, yes. The men were in charge and the women did the work.
And were you ever close with any teachers, or were they kind of part of your decision to go into teaching, like mentors to you?
Well, I loved elementary school, especially my kindergarten teacher, who I still remember. Her name was Mrs. Black. She encouraged those of us who were already reading, because some of us did enter kindergarten reading, which is much more common now, but it wasn't as common then. And she encouraged us to read more and learn more and ask questions. She really, to me, was the beginning of the critical thinking skills concept. But I have to say that I never felt that I had a bad experience at all in elementary school. All the teachers that I encountered were very enthusiastic, very encouraging. But then again, I had 37 kids in the class. I was
Wow.
one of 35, 36, 37. The only classrooms that I remember as a child being low in population was kindergarten and first grade. They were 26, 27. But by the time we got to fifth, sixth grade, there were over 30 kids in every class.
And did that remain the same through middle school and high school, that you felt that you were kind of either close with your teachers or they were really supportive and
Yeah, I always found them supportive. But that was my experience. And I think the fact that I let it be known to them, especially in middle school when you start having a different teacher for each subject area, I had a very keen interest in history, social studies, as they called it. And I'd let them know. I'd let them know I'd be willing to do anything extra, whatever extra readings they could give me. Yeah. So they knew how I felt, which
Mhm.
was probably a good thing that I did that because then they were there to encourage me to move on. So no, I can't say I had any bad experiences. I was probably one of the fortunate ones.
And you also joined the Future Teachers of America, which led to your decision to become a teacher. So who ran that program and who is in it? The gender makeup between men and women.
It was still predominantly female,
Mhm.
but that was in high school. That started in ninth grade, where you were offered the opportunity to join this organization. My particular high school was not that far away. Don't forget, this is the city.
Mhm.
So the schools are on top of each other. You know what I'm saying? At city blocks, you have all these apartment buildings. You have an elementary school probably on every other block and a middle school every 5 blocks, that kind of thing. So we would walk to the schools where we were being asked to help younger students. At that point, we did a lot of volunteering in K through 6, K through 5, and that was in all subject areas. That wasn't just, like reading. The gender, I would say probably still the majority were female at that point. The majority, there was some boys in my group, but not many. And those who were, it's interesting, they went for math and science.
They did.
Uh-huh. They were sort of, I have to feel pushed. No one ever said to me, I guess because part of that was because I spoke about my interest in history. So if they asked me to do anything in the middle school, it was with the social studies teachers, okay? But the boys were pushed into the math and science, absolutely.
And how did that feel, that it kind of the boys were pushed one way and the girls were pushed the other way? What if you wanted to become a science teacher?
Then I would have had to be outspoken about it, 100%. But I think because for me, I spoke about, like I said, history and social studies, and I hope to teach either elementary or middle school, high school social studies. I think because I expressed that to the club administrator, there was never a question for me. I really don't know how others, if any other, the other girls, if they said they wanted to do science, if they were told, no, 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 I can't answer that. I don't know. But I do know that the few boys that were in the group, they definitely were pushed more towards the math and the science. Yes,
And
yes.
just to confirm, the administrators of this program, they were men or women?
In the high school, we had one of each.
Okay.
We did have one of each. We had a male, I believe he was a chemistry teacher, a male chemistry teacher, and there was a female social study or English. She might have taught English and social studies teacher. I remember her too.
Which reflects what kind of the path you were going into.
Yeah.
The
But I
administrator.
already, like I said, I don't know what would have happened if I would have said, oh, no, I want to work with science, with chemistry or biology or algebra. I don't know what would have been said to me. I know my personality, and I probably would have, kept badgering them. Why can't I do that? But it never came up because that wasn't what I was after.
Right. And you don't remember anyone else experiencing that.
I don't mean the few girls I was close to. In fact, one who I still speak to, one of my old high school, she knew that she wanted to go into business. She wanted to work in business. So she asked to go into the business classes, which at that time is very different than what your business classes look like. It's typing and stenography and, that kind of thing. But no, I don't remember any of the other girls saying anything other than elementary ed,
Mhm.
so to speak. I would say the bulk of us did our volunteering in elementary school. My volunteering in the middle school social studies classes was far few and in between.
Mm,
It was, I mean, because it was the elementary teachers that asked for the help.
okay.
Okay. And I think that's because they were dealing with the younger children, a little more difficult with a 5-year-old than it is with a 13-year-old. So,
You graduated high school in 1966 and then
mhm,
went to attend Hunter College.
right.
Did a lot of people from your high school go to college?
I would say in my social circle, the answer is yes. I would say 90% of them did. Yes, in my social circle. Remember, I was still part of that enclave of the conservative Orthodox Jewish community.
Mhm.
And so education was pushed. It was pushed, obviously more for the men, the boys, I should say, than the girls, but it was pushed. So going on to college in the social group that I was in, yes, the parents did push that.
And was that community, was your whole school a part of that Orthodox community or just?
Well, it took in a neighborhood that had everything there, but there was that enclave of a Jewish population that was conservative Orthodox. The two main synagogues nearby, which were close to the Catholic Church and the other church, that group, that's where they went, to those two synagogues. So the social group I was with at that time, basically we all went on to secondary. We all went on to, colleges, whether it be Brooklyn College. Most of us did not go out of town. Again, probably because of money. This
Mhm.
was not people of wealth. So that, we all either went to Hunter College, Brooklyn College. At the time I went to school, when you graduating high school and you want to go to a CUNY, you listed 4 schools on an application. And you listed them in the order of your priority. And then they let you know whether you got in or not. So when the application came back and it showed you got into your first choice, that was great, But I have to say, my immediate social group, we all either went to Brooklyn, Hunter, or Queens.
And did you notice any difference between the men and women listing the schools, getting into certain schools?
I don't recall. Most of the boys Most of the boys, when they went on to college, went into business. They took business courses. I mean, the first year you have to take liberal arts regardless, and we had to take a foreign language in our first year. So most of them went in and they took business, they took finance, they took banking, that kind of situation. I don't recall too many taking education classes. No.
In college.
In college, no. My college classrooms it was interesting. My college classrooms at Hunter, the classes that I took in elementary ed were mostly female. But I did get a second license in social studies, so I had to take some of the high school classes, level. And there were more guys, more boys.
And what about the professors? Were they men or women?
Mixed. I will say they were mixed. Obviously the elementary ed professors, the ones who taught elementary reading, elementary math, they were all female. But you did get male, professors there too, but mostly in the science and math classes.
I also just wanted to touch on a little bit. So it kind of seems like it was expected of you to go to college based on, you said in your community, really all your friends, the people you surrounded yourself with were, but your older sister did not. So why did she not go, and how did that influence your decision?
I think two things. I think number one, my sister was more influenced by my mom about going to school. Grades were important to both my parents. You do well, do the best you can do. If you're having a problem, let us know. I mean, I remember hearing that as a child, but when my sister expressed that she wanted to basically graduate high school and get a job as a secretary, in high school, she took stenography, which is probably a foreign language to you. She took stenography, she took typing, courses like that, how to run an office management, this is what she wanted. She told me often enough. I'm sorry?
You didn't take the same classes?
No, I took all academic. At that time, your diplomas were different. You had academic diploma, you had commercial diploma. Because in the academic diploma, you were required to take a certain amount of courses for Regents credit. And without that diploma, you could not go on to a 4-year college.
So she did not have that.
No, she didn't want it. She didn't want it. I mean, she took what was required, whatever the state required for her to take in math, science, social studies, history, whatever. She took those, but she took the minimum amount that was needed, to get that requirement, because she knew she didn't want to go on to college. She had made up her mind that she was going to follow that path of graduating, doing well, going on to getting a job, meeting someone, and having a family. That was her goal. And I was.
How did that make you feel? So when she was in high school, you were in elementary school?
Well, yeah, she's 8 years. So yeah, when 14, 15, I'm 8 years younger, I'm 7, I'm 8. I already knew that at that point, I already knew that I wanted to go on to college. I mean, I knew how I was. I envied the teachers. I loved watching them teach. I just enjoyed that. And I knew this was something I wanted for myself. So like I said, it was a bit of a battle with my mom in the beginning, but she came around and said, listen, if this is what she wants, then fine.
And if you hadn't wanted to be a teacher, do you think you still would have gone to college?
Oh, yes, I would have gone to college. Even if it wasn't being a teacher, I knew that I was happiest at school. That's when I was really, my life revolved around school. Even when it came to the other activities, the extracurricular activities, like I said, I joined the Future Teachers of America Club. I joined the Reading Club. I was on Future Maths. It wasn't called what it's called now, but it was Future Math or something club. That's what I looked for. I was for the academics. It was what I wanted to do. So I sort of like knew this was my goal. I knew I didn't want to come out of high school, work in an office and get married and boom. I knew that wasn't me. So you have to know yourself, also.
And do you remember what sports were being offered, and if there was different between boys and girls while you were growing up or
Oh, you mean in the schools?
Mhm.
Well, the girls didn't play football, and there was not a girls' softball team,
Mhm.
at least that I recall. I went to Tilden High School in Brooklyn. Um, we were the cheerleaders. Um, we were the booster girl. I belonged to the booster club. You had to come out with your pom poms. The girl sport. I mean, I was in the city, so there wasn't tennis. There wasn't what someone like yourself would be accustomed to living out in the suburbs. Um, I don't honestly recall because you see, sports wasn't my thing either.
Mm.
I didn't play in any of those things, so I don't even recall that. But I do remember that the boys had the football team. I don't even remember soccer being or playing that big a role like it does now. Um, I don't remember that influence at all. But football, baseball, that's all I really recall in high school as far as teams went, and those were boys.
Only boys.
Only boys, only
Mhm.
boys. There might have been something for the girls, and I just don't remember it because I wasn't interested. It wasn't something that I looked to do. If they were looking for sports after school, and that's what they did. I know we had a dance team. I remember that. Um, they had a twirling team, you remember the twirling, the batons? Yes. There was a twirling team, but that's what I remember as far as sports like offerings, for the girls.
But you said you were part of the Booster Girls.
Yes, I was a
So
booster.
what was that like?
It was interesting that you went to the football games and you had the twirlers and you had the cheerleaders who do their thing. And then we would just come out, in our pretty little skirts and the tops, and you had the pom poms, and what, whatever you did. But I did that only for like probably my senior year or maybe my junior and senior year. It wasn't something I wanted, but I knew it looked good on a college application. That
Okay.
much the guidance counselors, they told you, however you can make yourself look, more involved, more active would help. So I joined.
Did you enjoy it?
It was okay.
Mhm.
Like I said, it wasn't my thing, but I know I made friends certainly. Like that one girl I told you about who went into business classes. She was on the booster team with me. We both said we can't twirl. Every time we threw the thing up in the air, it landed on the floor. And I didn't want to be a cheerleader. It wasn't, that wasn't for me.
Then you graduated Hunter College in 1970.
Yes.
And how did you find your first job?
Okay. Well, at that time is very different than now. In New York City, don't forget, I was living in Brooklyn. I also had gotten married.
Mhm.
When I graduated college, I was already married. Um, and we lived in Brooklyn. So I knew that I wanted to at least start off my teaching career local because I didn't always have a car at my disposal. And I did have a bus and train at my disposal. I lived around the corner from both the bus and the train station. So in New York City, the way it worked, you had to take an exam. It wasn't like that in the rest of the state. You had to take an exam for elementary ed and an exam if you wanted anything in secondary. So I took two exams, secondary level social studies, and I took the exam for elementary ed. Based on your score, the city then placed you in a school where there were openings, unless you knew somebody.
Mm.
And if you knew someone who, let's say, worked at a school 2 blocks away, And they said, hey, I know my school's going to have an opening. Mrs. So-and-so is moving to California. And she could get you in, for an interview with someone. Then you had an opportunity of not waiting for the city to place you.
So
That,
were the schools ranked differently? Is that why your score met?
well, the way they did it, and it was, I'm sure it influenced what happened in the future. The philosophy at that time, it was claimed that the higher your score, the better district you were assigned to. The lower your score, the lower you went to the lower performing districts. That's what they claimed. Not having worked there, in the system at that time, I couldn't tell you, but that's what they claimed. I was fortunate, even before the score came back, that I did know somebody. I lived in the Sheepshead Bay area, but I knew somebody who worked within the Canarsie area of Brooklyn, which I could get to by bus. And they were able to get me in for an interview, and I was able to start the job. Because don't forget, I didn't start in September. I graduated college early. So I graduated January, and I started my job at a school in Brooklyn in February.
Oh, so mid-year you were able to start teaching.
Yeah, well, what she had an opening for a second grade teacher was leaving. She was moving away. Her husband's job had changed, and so the principal, I had to meet with the principal, I had to meet with the superintendent, that kind of thing. Went for the interview, and I was fortunate because this person knew someone to get me into that school. Yes.
And were the principal and the superintendent at the school, were they men or women?
Men.
They were men, but a lot of the teachers were women.
Well, in that school, like I said, the phys ed teacher, there was always a male phys ed teacher. They always had at least one and one, Sometimes you'd have a music teacher that was a man. Sometimes you'd have an art teacher that was a man. But for the most part, the classroom teachers in elementary were women. Here and there, a smattering of men on the upper grades, like sixth grade, because Uncle Mike was a sixth grade teacher.
Okay.
But he was in Manhattan, in upper Manhattan. So that's where they put the men, they didn't put them in the lower grades. Though that's very different now, but they didn't at that time.
And so even though you did know someone, you still had a formal interview process, it
Oh,
sounds.
yeah. Yes, you had to go. Well, it no longer do you take a written and oral exam to get the license. But at that time, you had to take an oral exam and a written exam to get a score. And at a certain score, you were told, yes, you could get a job. No, you couldn't, but they assigned you. Like I said, unless you had a way of intervening.
And do you remember if any personal questions were asked in your interview process about family planning, maybe?
The only one that's interesting, the superintendent never asked that question. The principal I first worked for, I can say it now, I didn't know too much then, was definitely very male chauvinistic. No two ways about it. Yes, he did ask me. He said, I see you're a newlywed. When do you plan on starting a family? And it was interesting because the assistant principal, who recently passed away and who I kept in touch with from my first job, she said to him, that's not a question you should be asking.
During the interview.
Yes. And he said to her, it's my school. I can ask what I want. And she said to him, you don't ask that question. I never responded.
Okay. And how did that make you feel, this happening right in front of you?
You know what? I didn't think too much about it until I got home and spoke to my husband. And I said, I don't know what's going to happen with this job. I like the idea that I can get there kind of easy, with little problem. But I said to him, he asked me when I planned to start a family, and he looked at me, Uncle Mike, and he said, well, what'd you tell him? I said, I didn't get a chance to tell him. I said, the assistant principal told him he can't do that. But there was no law then, you see. There was no law against them asking that kind of question. In fact, when I did get pregnant down the line, at that point, the assistant principal, the woman, she had become the principal. And
Okay.
yeah, he had retired
Mhm.
and she became the principal. And when I did become pregnant, unfortunately, I had one of those pregnancies where I wasn't well all day. And so I felt I had to tell her because there were times I had to run out of the classroom. And she said to me, as far as I know, she said, I know nothing about this. Because if you told them you were pregnant, they had the right to ask you to leave.
So immediately they could ask you to
They
leave.
could, if they didn't mean they had to, but in other words, they couldn't get in trouble if they said, to me, Mrs. Berkowitz, you're pregnant. It's obvious you can't give your full in the classroom, but your full attention, and they could ask you to leave. But she said to me, as far as I know, I don't know anything about this, and let's leave it that way. So she was progressive, for that time. I felt later on, I felt that way. I didn't feel that way then. And I was fortunate. My first son was born January 16th. I worked till January 2nd.
Hmm.
So I wasn't hiding anything, obviously, at that point. But she never said boo. And she did the same with the other younger teachers as well.
She didn't ask them to leave.
No,
So it was, I guess, when it would start to become more obvious that you were pregnant is when they could ask you.
they could, but no, she never did. She never did. I mean, unfortunately, the first couple of months was rough for me, but once that passed, the kids were very good. when I said, I don't feel so good. That I always had a little girl monitor, a little boy monitor in the first seat. He'd say, I'll go tell Mrs. Jones next door to keep an eye on us. But they got used to it. Sometimes you had to worry about how the parents would react because they don't like the idea that a teacher isn't giving their all.
And why is that? They just didn't
Well, they
think
feel
the same
how
efficiency?
much attention are you giving to the class if you're constantly running out to, you know. And I had to face that as a principal as well. When I was the principal and I had teachers who were pregnant.
So the same rules were in effect.
Well, when I became a principal, no. At that
Okay.
point, no. Legally, things had changed dramatically. But that didn't stop the parents from voicing their opinion, saying, I don't want my child in Mrs. Gutkin's class because it's obvious she's pregnant. And it's September. And what if she leaves? Is she leaving by November? I don't want my child to have a disruption in their education.
Hmm.
So I had to deal with that more
As
often than not. Yeah, it happens. And I used to have an answer for them, as you well know.
Well, before we dive more into the specifics of your career, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about your experiences dating and getting married.
Okay.
So, in high school, did you date and did your friends date?
Yeah. Yeah, dating in the city is very different than what you faced in the suburbs. Okay. Um, the movie theater wasn't far away. Okay. The local place to go for ice cream and soda and, bowling. These were things that were all usually in walking distance. So usually when we were younger, I would say, before the use of cars or anything, um, it would be you go as a group, a bunch of guys and a bunch of girls together. We'd go to the bowling alley, we go to the movie theater, we go for someplace to eat. When it started more one-on-one, sometimes we'd go into the city, at first my parents didn't want me on the subway, at night. But when you started meeting guys who had cars, that was a different story. But yeah, I dated in high school. Strangely enough, I met Uncle Mike. Nothing to do with college or anything. I went to a New Year's Eve party with a friend, a guy friend, who was home on R&R from Vietnam at the time. And I knew someone having a party, and I asked him if he wanted to come with me. And he came with me, and Uncle Mike was there with another date. And we didn't have a car. My friend didn't have a car. So we had taken a bus to the party, and we were going to take a cab home, and then Uncle Mike had a car, so he drove us all home.
With the other date.
I'm sorry?
With the other date.
He dropped her off first.
So you stayed in contact with him since then?
The other guy, the friend?
Since Uncle Mike dropped you off, since then you stayed in touch?
With Uncle, you're talking about with Uncle Mike?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, well, he called. He got my number from my girlfriend, she and her boyfriend had this party. We were all in college at the time. Uncle Mike was graduating. He was a senior.
You were in college and he was a senior.
He was a senior and I was just starting.
Mhm.
Okay. So he had asked her, which I didn't know, you see, she had given him my phone number. So that when my mother said to me, there's a guy on the phone named Mike, and I'm going, Mike who? Did not register. And that's how that started. But I was dating, in fact, the young man who I went to the New Year's Eve party with, he was always a friend. He lived in the neighborhood. We were never like girlfriend, boyfriend. He was just always a friend. And I was writing him all the time, in Vietnam. And when he came home for that 2-3 week break, we did things together because the guy I was dating, I basically broke up with before New Year's. So I kept in contact with him, but he moved out to California when he finally got out of the army. But
Did you have other friends in Vietnam as well?
did I have other friends from Vietnam?
That were in Vietnam that you
Oh,
stayed?
yeah. I had a couple of the guys who I knew from the neighborhood that, unfortunately had to go to NAM. Thankfully, out of the group that went, they all came home, some not good, but they came home. But I was closest to him as far as a friend goes. And then he got married and moved out to California. Yep, long time ago.
And did you feel that dating typically led to marriage quickly?
I would say to you that at that time, it was expected that if you were dating someone for a year and a half, someone along the line, whether it was mom, dad, grandma, or grandpa, said, well, where's the ring? So I would say my mother, not my father, never my father. My mother asked after Mike and I were dating almost a year. He graduated college and he had gotten a job. And she said, well, where do you think this is going? And I said, well, I still have, another 2.5 years of college left. And I said, I don't think it's going anywhere yet. And my father was, pushing that I not marry before I graduated. He was afraid if I married first, then I'd never finish school. And he didn't want that to happen.
So what was it like being married in college?
It was tough. It was tough because, I was used to coming home. Oh, I worked all through college. My parents, as I said, didn't have the monetary means to supply a lot of things. So they did pay for my books and they did pay for the application fees. But like if I wanted to hang out with the kids and we wanted to go, because I was in college in the city. Remember, I was on 68th and Park Avenue. Very close, quick ride to Bloomingdale's. But it was, if I wanted to go out and do things, if I wanted to buy a blouse that I saw, a pair of shoes that I thought were cool, I knew I was going to have to get the money on my own. So in my very first year of going to Hunter, I went to Equitable Life Insurance Company, which was in Manhattan, and I applied for a job and I got a part-time job. So it was rough for me in the beginning because Now suddenly I had a husband. And in my last year of school, I was a student teacher. So I was working all day in a classroom. I was then going and working at Equitable Life Insurance Company, and then coming home with the responsibility of being a wife.
And what did you see marriage life being like? So when you were actually married, coming home to those responsibilities, is that what you imagined it would be like?
Well, I was very fortunate. Uncle Mike is, and always was, and still is. He's very, very much in tune to my feelings. And, I did have a heart-to-heart talk with him. We still needed my money that I was making, even though he had a full-time job. He was now in grad, don't forget, New York City, New York State required you had to go get your master's degree. So he was graduated with his undergraduate, and now he had to go and get his master's at night. So he was at City College up in the Upper West Side there. And we shared all the household responsibilities, the cooking, the cleaning. It was a 3-room apartment. It was not a big, deal. But whatever responsibilities were, we had the agreement he would help, and do things, and laundry and all that. We did those things. We divided that up, and that part I don't have any complaints about. He was very helpful. I can't say that he turned around and said, I'm not doing that. No, that was not the case. So that was good. It made it easier, but it was a lot of work on both our parts. On both our parts. I'm student teaching. I'm working at Equitable. He's working full-time. He's going to City College at night. Well, it was not an easy time, but we managed.
So it sounds like the roles were split up evenly, which is great, and you're both really busy. But what about the decision making? For example, when you decided to buy your home?
It was a joint decision. Something we both came from apartments. Both of us were born in Brooklyn, and we lived in an apartment, with our parents. We didn't have the luxury of a backyard, or living in that kind of a community. I mean, I lived in an apartment building. Always had a lot of friends. There was the one thing good about that. You came out the door in the morning as a kid, you had a million choices of who to play with, that was never an issue. Like, who do I have to call, make a play date? You never had to do that. There was no such thing because there were always plenty of kids around. But we both knew that we wanted a home, our own home with a backyard. I was at this point, my sister was out and married a while with children of her own. And since my parents felt they needed to cut back on expenses, I went from living with my sister. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, my mother and father in 1 bedroom, my sister and I in the other. Well, once she moved out and got married, my parents came in and told me that we would have to go to a smaller apartment because they couldn't afford the rent of a 2-bedroom apartment. So from that point on, I was 13 when she got married. I was 13. They got a smaller apartment and I slept in the living room.
For
So
all of middle school and high
from
school?
13 till the age of 20, 7 years, I slept in
Wow.
the living room. Well, like I said, money was an issue for them. They had what to eat. They had the money to pay the rent, that kind of thing. But what they considered extras or luxury. So he didn't have that. He did have his own bedroom, but he shared it with his brother, Uncle Mike. But we both agreed we wanted our own home. So that was a joint effort, putting our pennies together, and that's what happened.
And then I know we touched on you being pregnant already, but do you remember, and the reactions of your school, but do you remember anything that your doctor said you could or couldn't do when you were pregnant?
Now, he told me I could continue working, which I did until 2 weeks before my son was born. You know, just the usual. I worked, I was teaching in a school. I had to climb steps every day. I was always a walker. So he told me keep doing the walking. He says that can't hurt you in any which way, shape, or form. They filled you up with vitamins. But I wasn't told I shouldn't or couldn't do certain things, because maybe if I was the type that was playing baseball or something or soccer, he would have said, but it wasn't an issue for me. It wasn't an issue. So I was fortunate that my pregnancies were the type that I could keep on doing what I was doing.
And I know you did have two sons and eventually moved out to Long Island. So when it came to parenting, how did you split up the responsibilities of parenting while you and Uncle Mike were both working full time?
It was not easy, but we did it. When my first son was born, I took a leave of absence from New York City public schools, but I was already living on Long Island. I had moved to Long Island while I was pregnant. So I was commuting while pregnant from Holbrook, New York, to South Brooklyn.
And you're driving?
I was driving. I was in a carpool, but I didn't meet the carpool till like midway into Nassau County. So it was a long stretch, but I needed the job. We had just bought a home and I needed the job. So Uncle Mike and I sat down. That's one thing we were always able to do. We sat down, we said, this is the story, this is what it's going to be. The fun thing that used to be, well, in the beginning, you see, I took off. I took the medical leave, so the maternity leave, I should say. So I wasn't working. I was home full time with my first son. So basically, at that point, he was commuting and still going to school. Okay, until he got his second master's degree. So what occurred was, did I do most of the home chores? The answer is yes. But when he was home on the weekend, he would do much more. He'd do his work studies, whatever he had to do, but then he'd be with the baby. So if I wanted to take a nap, I just wanted to go around the corner to visit a girlfriend. I also liked the idea of going to the food store by myself without a screaming kid in the wagon. So that was fine. But I made the decision to help us financially to go back to substitute teaching.
While your kids were young.
Yeah, but I knew I wasn't going to do that in New York City, because that would be, they can't call me up at 6 a.m, gee, we need you today, and PS whatever. I'm not going to get there on time. So I applied to substitute work in the local school district. I didn't have to worry about my son because he was a baby, so he wasn't in the school. And I told them, I gave them 1 or 2 days a week that I could do it. So that helped. And then after doing that for 3 years, I had my second child. So I extended my maternity leave, continued doing that, subbing. And then when my youngest son went to full day kindergarten, I went back full time.
And once you were both working full time with your two sons who were pretty young, if one of them was sick, who would stay home?
We alternated.
You would alternate.
We had alternated.
And you were both working in the city at that time?
When they were that young, yes, we were both working in the city. We alternated it once in a while. When I was still in Holbrook, your Grammy helped me out a couple of times. But for the most part, we would alternate. If he took off this time, I took off the next time. One time when, I don't remember if it was my oldest or my youngest, he had like a strep infection. He was sick the whole week. Then my mother came out. I went into Brooklyn, picked her up, and she stayed out for the week at my house.
Since you had to work.
Since I had to work, yeah. And then when my youngest son went, like I said, full-time to K, I went back full-time. We then looked to move. We put the house up for sale, and we moved into Nassau County because it was closer. The trip was much closer. Instead of taking me an hour and a half to get home, it took me 3/4 of an hour, So we made that major move. but it was worth it. You know, it just made life easier for us.
And was that a mutual decision?
Yes.
And since Uncle Mike was both a teacher, was a teacher as well as you are, did you, I know you had some differences in, he taught different, you said he taught sixth grade?
For the most part, he taught the upper, when he was a teacher, he taught the upper grade, fifth and sixth grade. Yes. And
And
I,
was that by choice that maybe you taught younger grades than him?
well, I taught everything. I taught everything from kindergarten up to eighth grade. Um, it was a joke. My mother-in-law used to say, "What's wrong with us? You can't stay in the same." But I got bored. I got bored very easily having to teach the same curriculum year. I mean, I had teachers when I was a principal who had been teaching the same subject in the same school for 28 years. And I couldn't understand that. I would have, you know, but this is what they liked and this is what they did. But I did teach everything. I taught eighth grade social studies also, and seventh grade social studies. So I would change after every couple of years. I would ask the principal in a request at the end of the year, next year I'd like to teach third grade, you know, instead of first grade. I actually preferred age-wise teaching grades 4 and up. I
Okay.
love being with the little kids, but I like the teaching, the subject matter, I should say, of the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade better.
And you said he only taught fifth and sixth? Did he ever teach anything else?
As an elementary person, I think 1 year he taught second grade. He was not too thrilled because the kids were always tugging on his pants. But for the most part, in his teaching career, he taught mostly fifth and sixth grade. Yes, until he became an administrator.
Right. And you both went into administration.
Yes. Yes, we both
So
went.
was that around the same time or?
No, he was an administrator before I was. Um, I was, at the time he got his first administration job, I was what they call a teacher trainer. I had reached the point they were using me more in the capacity of training teachers and, you know, new teachers in the school, and doing demonstration lessons and things of that nature. He was already an assistant principal in another school. So no, he had the interest in doing that before I did. I really never had any interest at first in being an administrator at all. I always wanted to be the teacher. And it was someone else who encouraged me to move forward. So
So did seeing him go into administration play a role in that, or was it another? Okay.
no, it was, I mean, I was thrilled for him. This is what he wanted. And I said, good for you. And I'm glad you get a pay raise. But it was, for me, it didn't happen. I'm trying to think. And maybe 3 years later, when I was in another position, that my senior supervisor said to me, you know, why are you doing this? Why aren't you an administrator? And I said, well, I love teaching. I love teaching teachers. I love teaching children. This is what I enjoy doing. And he's the one who pushed me. He really did push me. And so I went in and started taking my second master's degree for administration.
And since Uncle Mike was in administration first, once you went into administration, was there ever any differences in the way you received promotions or your salary or raises that you discussed?
Well, at the time we were both in the city. So it was pretty much well set. You know, he knew there was no hidden information. You sort of like knew first year principal makes this, first year assistant principal, second year makes, so like I knew what his salary was going to be. My position was a little different because I was working at the Central Board of Education at the time in downtown Brooklyn. And it was my immediate supervisor there who was the one who pushed me, because I came in on a teacher's license, working at the Central Board, and he's the one who pushed me into administration. I got my 1 year degree. I did it in 1 year. I went to CW Post LIU CW Post. I started in the summer, and by the next summer, I had my master's.
And you worked as a teacher while you did that.
Yep. Well, I was working not as a teacher, I was working in the central board, but I
You
was
were
on a
already working
teacher's
in the board.
license. I was still like training other people, but I wasn't an administrator. I was a teacher license. So he was the one who pushed me. The guy I worked for there, he pushed hard. So I did it.
And when you went into administration, were most of the other administrators men or women?
It was a mixture. By the time I went in, I would say to you that there were many more women at that point who were in administrative class, school, in positions in schools. In fact, I remember one of the first appointees I remember administratively was the principal of a high school in the Lower East Side was a woman of Asian descent. They gave her this, and the high schools in New York City, are huge. They could have 1,500, 3,000 kids in them. And she was given that position, which I thought was fascinating because they usually didn't do that. But by the time I became, full-fledged administration, I would say it was a decent half and half. You saw men and you saw women. There are many women superintendents out here on Long Island, which wasn't the case many years ago at all. It was all men.
So there was definitely a lot of change from when you were going to school as a student to when you.
Absolutely. An absolute difference. The first administration job I had out here on Long Island, I replaced a male principal who had been in the job as a principal for 20-something years. And he had been in the same school all that time. And when I got the job, I remember the superintendent, who at the time was a man, he said to me, "Congratulations, you've broken the barrier." Because that school had only had male principals.
So you were the first woman principal.
I was the first woman principal the school had.
And how did that feel?
I didn't read too much into it. I said, okay. I didn't feel any difference. The district itself had female principals in it. I wasn't the first female principal in the district, but
Right.
for that school, it had this man for the 20-something years and had a man before him. So it's just interesting, but it was fine. It was good.
And did you ever find that men in administration were treated differently?
Oh, 100%. In fact, one of the reasons why I left that particular school district on Long Island and went to the last one I had where I retired from, a situation had occurred at the high school. The principal of the high school had retired, and they had hired someone, and that person was working there. And one of the assistant principals there got a job in another district further east, a male, a young guy in his late 30s, I would say. And things seemed fine. And then all of a sudden, it turned out that the principal the district hired in the high school, they weren't too pleased with him. And so after a year on the job, they let him go. And then they hired back the young man who left, the assistant principal who left, who had become a principal in another district out east. They hired him back as the new principal. Now, the other principals and myself in the lower schools, the elementary and the middle, said, "Oh, that's nice," until we heard what he did. The board and the superintendent offered him more money than any of us who had been working in the district with much more experience. Okay. And one of the other women principals, who was there before I was, in another elementary school, she said to me, "Now, how could this be? He's 39 years old. He doesn't even have 20 years in the system." She's, "I'm working 31 years. I've been the principal of my elementary school for the last 15. how could he be making more money than I am? And so she brought it up at an administrators meeting. And I admit the young man was kind of uncomfortable, which I could understand. But the answer she received from the superintendent at the time was, well, he's a young man with a family, and we have to take care of him. And I think that all of us, the women who were sitting there who had more years in, like we all went ballistic at the same time. And I turned around to the person I was friendly with, another female principal, and I said to her, I'm leaving. I will not be treated like this. And I did. And so did she. And so did a third person. We all left the district, 3 women, and we got jobs elsewhere. And
Wow.
when the superintendent couldn't understand it, I came right back and I told him. I said, you made that statement. And he said, well, it's a fact of life. And I said, I disagree. Not that he shouldn't get paid what he's worth, but don't sit there and tell us that he should make that much more money than we do. And he's got 2 years experience as an AP and 1 year experience as a principal in another school. And here I worked at central headquarters. She had been a principal for 21 years, whatever it is, 15 years. No, that's not an answer. And we did write a letter to the school board. What they did with the letter, I do not know. But then I went looking for another job. And I lucked out with a wonderful job closer to home.
And after that, the administration, you did not notice other situations like that in your
In the new district I went to? No, not at all. During my tenure there, we had men superintendents, we had women superintendents. There were male principals and female principals, and same thing with assistant principals. It was a mixture. No, I didn't see that at all. Not in this particular district I worked in, where I retired from. No, not at all. But that original one on Long Island, and you didn't see that in the city. When I was a principal in the Bronx, the superintendent was a woman. The assistant superintendent was a man.
So Long Island was kind of behind.
Depending on the district. It's not all the districts are like that. It depended on the district. This particular district was run what I consider very old fashioned at the time, but it was a way for me to get in, you know what I'm saying? To get my foot in the door to an administrative job on Long Island instead of my having to trek from Plainview, New York to the Bronx. So I took it and I was glad I did. I enjoyed my experience there working with the teachers and the children and the parents, but it was for the best.
Definitely. So throughout your career, you were a teacher administrator over 35 years. So I kind of wanted to touch on how some things might have changed while you were working compared to your time as a student. First, were there any dress codes at the schools you worked at?
Well, as the years went by, well, there were certain dress codes more so at the high school level than certainly at the elementary, and even middle school. But then some of these districts did away with dress codes. Some of the districts did do away with it and say the kids could come however they wanted. Did I, as a principal, have a problem with that? Yeah. I guess that's the old-fashioned part of me. In the last district I worked in, I started, when I got the job, they told me we'd be opening up a brand new school, which they did do. They built a brand new elementary school, primary school. And that was the school I was going to be principal of. And the superintendent told me that right before they opened, he wanted to have on this Saturday morning, you know, the politicians come and the parents are invited and they get a tour. And there'll be a little speech in the auditorium kind of thing. And I said, fine, you know. And he said to me, and I've spoken to the high school principal, and we'd like to use the honor students in the senior class to be like, you know, escort the politicians to their seats and all that. And I said, fine, he's the superintendent. This is what he wants to do. Fine. And he said, I'll have you meet with the high school advisor, which I did do. Very nice man. And he said to me, I think we're going to have a problem. And I said, what's the problem? He said, well, I read your letter, and apparently you want all the students to come in either slacks. It could be jeans. I didn't care if it was jeans, slacks, with a blouse or a top. But no, they couldn't wear midriff, with a stomach and the belly button showing, and they couldn't wear cutoffs. And I mean, you're having state politicians there, local Long Island politicians there, parents are coming. And he said, they're going to fight you. The kids are going to fight you. Now, they're not 10, they're not 9, they're 17 and 18 years old, okay? And I said, well, you let me handle it. And he said, okay. And now they needed it for credit, community credit, on their college applications. So I met with them and I told them what the expectation, there were 12 of them who volunteered to do it. And there were a couple that, the girls raised their hands and said, but I want to be able to wear what I want. And I said, my school, my rules. If you don't want to follow the rule, then you don't have to volunteer. It's fine. So all 12 did it, and I got thank you letters from some of the parents.
So they ended up dressing appropriately.
Oh, they all did. He gave them sashes to wear, whatever the superintendent wanted. I really didn't care. It was fine. But they were going to be the ones greeting these people coming in. No, the girls were not going to wear little tube tops and whatnot. That was not going to happen. But the high schools basically have reached the point now, at least here, there really isn't a dress code, so to speak. Many of the schools allow them to come any which way.
That's interesting. What about the types of activities offered? So whether that be clubs or sports?
From when I went to school?
Yeah, and did you see it change throughout your career?
Definitely. There are many more clubs, and the interest level, I think they do listen to the student body, at least in the high school. They listen to the student body, what kind of clubs they would like and the activities they want to be involved in. And now you do have girls soccer, girls softball, girls tennis, girls hockey. You know what I'm saying? They girls lacrosse. I mean, they have it. These districts all have it. This was not in place when I went to school. No. Major change.
In regards to the classes, like you said, your sister was taking typing and different sorts of classes. Did those still remain or did they go away?
Well, they don't have typing anymore. Now you take computer classes, and you start the computer classes in elementary. So there's no need to take typing. The biggest, and those of us who are of this age, we laugh most about the fact with the handwriting classes that you took, you had what they called cursive writing. You learned that in 3rd or 4th grade. That doesn't exist anymore because
I remember that.
Okay, no, it isn't taught anymore. There is no such thing, which is interesting because when I've written something in script, my younger grandson has said to me, what is that? Clueless. He's never seen it. Never seen it. We used to have above the chalkboard and the whiteboard, you had those strips of the alphabet, both in print and in cursive. No more. It's changed. There's been a lot of changes. It's just different. You don't have commercial academic diplomas anymore.
Right.
Because the state has made different requirements. You're not going to see typing classes. Will you see business classes? Yes. But now there'll be accounting. It'll be finance. It will be all kinds of anything related to, they also have pre-law classes. I know the district I retired from, they offered pre-law they social work classes, engineering classes. My oldest son, Ron, okay, he in high school took a 3-year level coursework from RIT in engineering. That wasn't offered when I was a teacher in the city at all, ever.
But in classes, specifically engineering or social work, like you said, did you notice or remember that there were differences in boys and girls who were taking those classes?
When my son and my grandson, yes. Now, 100%. His class from RIT that he took at high school, he said about half, if not quite half of the class were females. Yeah. But that wouldn't have been the case when I went to school. And I don't know that it would have been the case when, my sons went to school. Is it the case now that my grandsons are in school? Yes. That in that sense, women have made their mark. Yes. We've moved forward.
I also just wanted to touch on sex ed. So was that offered in the schools when you were principal?
Fifth grade, they offered through the phys ed and health department. Parents could opt out, but they showed films and they had the discussions. The male gym phys ed teacher had discussions with the boys, and the female phys ed teacher had discussions with the girls, and that kind of thing. But they still do it in the elementary schools.
Okay, so it wasn't a separate health class, it was by the phys ed
It was
teachers.
done by the phys ed teachers, yes. I believe they had to go for training. They had to take courses in it. So they went for training, 100%.
And did you receive any of that when you were growing up?
No, no, please. That was never allowed. That wasn't discussed at all.
But it remained around the same age through your career, so around fifth grade is when they did
Yes,
it.
they did it when the kids turned 10, 11 years old. Yes, that's when they started. That's when they started. Society has changed greatly. And I would say that thanks to social media and a lot of other things, TV, 10-year-olds now know a lot more than 10-year-olds did many years ago.
I
It's
would agree
just
with that.
just the nature of things, the music, everything else. It's part of what it is. Many people will sit there and say that's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible, but that's what's happened. And you have to deal with it yourself. You have to deal with it as a teacher. You have to deal with it as a parent. That's what it is.
So lastly, I just wanted to hit on your retirement. When did you decide to retire and how did that feel?
um, well, Uncle Mike had been retired. Obviously, he started before I did. Okay. So he had been retired about 3 or 4 years. And I had already reached my limit. I had been in the system almost 36 years, 35 years and change. And while I enjoyed and loved going to work each and every day, things were starting to change via the state. For instance, it used to be that as an untenured teacher, that means teaching under 3 years, you had observations where the principal or assistant principal came in, observed you, wrote it up, discussed where you could improve, and okay. The state, in my last year of working, changed it. And then they turned around to the districts and said, well, if you want to make it even, tighter, so to speak, you have the ability to do so. Well, for whatever the reason, my district superintendent and assistant superintendent and the parents played a major role. They decided now that untenured teachers would have to have anywhere from 6 to 8 observations a year. And tenured teachers were going to have 3 to 4. Now, I had over 1,000 kids in my school. I had a staff of over 250, whatever, 57. I'm also thinking of itinerant teachers. I'm saying to myself, I'm never going to get, when am I going to have time to do, you know what I'm saying? Anything. I used to spend my days in the classrooms. I was not one to sit in an office. I never was. I got to my desk every day by 6:30. I got in with the custodian. I stayed till 6 o'clock,
Wow.
but I did my paperwork and reports before the children came in, which in the last school was about 9 o'clock, and after they left, after 3:30. I didn't sit all day in an office and, type on the computer because I wanted to be out there with the kids. I knew every kid's name in the school. I made it my business. I learned it within the first 2 weeks. I said to myself, I'm never going to get a chance to go in a classroom other than to do an observation and then have to sit and write it up. So when I brought it up at a meeting, the other administrators agreed with me. It was ridiculous. I mean, the high school principal was going crazy. Because think about it, how many teachers did you have in high school? You have one teacher for every, subject. The district said, this is what we want. And it gnawed at me the whole year, and I said to Mike, I don't have time to breathe. I'm doing observations all day long. I had an assistant principal, but between the two of us, none of us ever got into a classroom to do anything but. And I used to read to every single kindergarten, first and second grade classroom. I read every day. I had another class, I read a story to.
Every single day.
Every single day. I did it for the 6 years I was in my last school because I felt I wanted to instill that love of reading in the K1 and 2. By third grade, they know what they're doing already, whether they be readers or not. But I really, this was my goal. And it just bothered me. I couldn't do anything anymore. And the teachers were upset as well, And I said to the superintendent, I said, you could put me in a classroom with a teacher, and I could spend the first 10 minutes in there, and I'll tell you whether this is someone who's worth their salt. I knew right off the bat whether this was a person who could teach or this was a person who can't manage a classroom. I don't need to come in 7 times.
That's a lot.
Or 6 times. It's ridiculous. Plus, I was also teaching at college level. I was teaching at Dowling. I was working in their education department, and I had student teachers in my building. I had to observe them too. I literally felt I didn't have time to breathe. And it's really a shame because I loved my job. I loved being with the kids. The parent body is difficult. Sometimes you got to deal with, okay. The teachers, for the most part, at least I felt I never really worked with teachers that I didn't have respect for. I did. Most of my staff members and colleagues that I worked with were wonderful. I really can't complain about that. But this part really bothered me because I felt I became a paper pusher. And no longer was I making a mark on kids. And no longer was I helping a teacher become a better teacher. I was now becoming a watchdog. And so I announced my retirement. Do I miss it? I miss the children. Do I miss all the other nonsense that goes on? The answer is no. I don't miss the infighting, this teacher doesn't like that teacher, this parent doesn't like them, the bus driver. No, I don't miss that part. But I do miss that greeting of the kids each morning, hi, Mrs. B, how are you? Do you have a good weekend? I miss that connection. And I like being around children. So I will say that in my grandchildren's younger years, I did a lot of volunteering in their schools, where they live. I would read to the class. I'd go on the class trips. Like my daughter-in-law and my son both work. So they'd ask parents to volunteer for class trips. So I told my son, volunteer me wherever they're going. If they need someone to come, I'll gladly go. I just enjoyed being around the children.
So you were still able to be involved, which is
great.
Yeah,
no, I like being around kids. I won't deny it. That's just the way it is.
So in light of all your experiences, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
My younger self, that I had the ambition, that I had the drive, that I was willing to stand up for myself, even with my own mother, who in the beginning kept trying to defer me and move me in another direction. Because I don't know if I ever would have been happy doing anything else. The 4 years, 5 years I spent at Central Board, where I really wasn't with children. I was training adults, so to speak, going to meetings, a lot of meetings, and meeting with parent groups and meeting with this group and meeting with that group. I didn't mind giving that up. That wasn't my happiest 4 or 5 years in my career. My favorite time in my career was being in the classroom. And someone said to me once, the superintendent is looking for a new assistant superintendent in curriculum, and he's thinking of asking you to put your papers in for it. And I said, I don't want that. I don't want to sit in an office. I did that at central headquarters. I don't want to sit in an office at a district level, pushing papers, going to meetings, and then having to write people up because they didn't do something right. This is not what I want. I tried that. I left that because I basically, when I left Central Board and went back to being a principal of a school, I took a pay cut. But I felt I had enough years left that I reached what I wanted from my retirement. So that's how I see it. I'm just glad I had the personality I had. My mother wasn't too thrilled, but I had the personality I had.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been really great.
So much fun. We all love talking about ourselves, don't we? Yeah.